about 45 million pounds of chips in a quarter. That equates to about 200 million pounds of potatoes, which is quite a few. What's interesting with M&T is they're a small town bank, and as we've grown, they've also grown with us. They've got the resources that you would need in order to go big, but they also have that friendly local community feel so that it makes it seem easier than it probably is.
Hello, and welcome to Candidates Up Front. This series of interviews with candidates on the November 3rd general election ballot is brought to you by Berks Community Television and the League of Women Voters of Berks County. Both organizations are nonpartisan. That means we never support candidates or political parties. But both organizations consider it their mission to provide voters with information about elections. I'm Judith Cranus, a member of the League. First, if you are not registered to vote, go to votespa.com to register. Votespa.com is in English and Spanish, and you have until October 19th to register, but the smart thing is, do it now. And if you do not want to stand in line on Election Day, apply for a mail-in ballot. Again, go to votespa.com, do it now. When your ballot arrives, mail it in right away. We help our Berks County Election Services Office handle this election smoothly if we are timely. And if you choose to go to your polling place on Election Day, polls are open from 7 in the morning till 8 at night. This year, we will vote for Pennsylvania Attorney General, Auditor General, and Treasurer. We will also elect representatives to the U.S. Congress, to the Pennsylvania Senate, and to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. Now, the League and BCTV invited all but the statewide candidates to be interviewed. Some did not reply, some declined. Those who agreed will be asked the same questions in the same order with the same time limits as others running for the same office. These interviews will be available on BCTV's webpage and YouTube channel. And if you watch the interviews of two competing candidates, you can compare their answers to make your decision on how you want to vote. This interview is for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in the 129th District, and I believe we have a map of that district. It's southwestern Berks County. State representatives serve a 2-year term in the state legislature in Harrisburg. They initiate legislation and vote to create laws. They pass the budget, including taxes and expenditures of the state. They offer help to state government with issues about state government to constituents of their districts. The salary for a state senator is $88,610 per year, plus benefits and expenses. The two candidates are Kelly McDonald, a Democrat, and Jim Cox, a Republican. This interview is with Mrs. McDonald. She is the challenger. Welcome, Mrs. McDonald.
Thank you for having me.
Our first question is, why do you want to be a state representative, and what are your qualifications for this position?
I want to be a state representative because I want all constituents, all residents of my area, of the 129th, to be represented. I feel that our demographics have changed a lot. I'm a teacher in the district at Wilson High School, and I've watched year after year as my students have changed, their families have changed. And I think that gives me a unique perspective on what the district needs and wants during this time. I believe that the students and their families are changing, and the representation has remained the same year after year. And as a teacher, I feel as though I can have a positive impact on the community to push the community forward, because I've worked with the community for the past 10 years. I know their needs and I know their wants, and I think that I can be a great representative for them.
Thank you. What are the 3 most important things you want to accomplish if elected?
So the three most important things that I want to accomplish are the three most important things I think facing this district and this state. The first is to raise the minimum wage. In Pennsylvania, it is imperative that we create a livable wage for all Pennsylvanians so they can put food on their families' tables every night. The second issue is the environment. This isn't just a local issue. This isn't just a statewide issue. This is a global issue. And if we don't address the climate crisis now, our children will suffer. I have two small boys, and I want them to have clean air and clean water for the rest of their lives and for their children. That's imperative that we start that here, now, on the local level, so we can make changes for our future generations. As a public school teacher, the other issue that I think is most important is education. Provide proper funding to our schools to create equitable school districts across Pennsylvania. Education is the great equalizer, and I believe that if every student has access to quality education, we can really move forward as a society.
Thank you. What do you think about the state management of COVID-19, and do you see a greater impact on minorities and women?
I believe that Pennsylvania did a good job in the beginning of the pandemic addressing COVID-19. There were some hardships, obviously, as we were learning this together. We were going through it together. But Pennsylvania was one of the few states that really got their case numbers under control from a safety perspective. Now, in other issues were, small businesses and businesses losing money and things like that. And I think that needed to be addressed sooner and needs to be addressed again now as we're, going on 6 months here of this pandemic. I do absolutely believe that minorities and women were affected disproportionately. Minorities don't have the same access to health care. They often live in low-income cities that are more crowded. There were higher rates. We know that there were higher rates of COVID-19 among minority groups. Women especially, I feel, felt the burden of lack of childcare during the pandemic, choosing between work and staying home with their children. And again, that's not something that should fall on a woman. That's something that's a family problem, and because of that, it's a statewide problem as well.
There currently is no county health department in Berks County. Do we need one? And should this be paid for by the state government?
Absolutely. Berks County has very specific needs. We can't compare Berks County to other counties in the state when we're making these, great one-size-fits-all policies. One-size-fits-all doesn't work for Berks County, and we need local officials who know the area, who know the residents, who know our healthcare systems, who can make informed decisions that will help us, and not just the state as a whole. We need local officials making those decisions.
What do you think are common sense gun violence controls the state should have in place?
So I support an American's right to the Second Amendment. In that regard, however, I do feel as though we need to ban assault-style weapons. So again, I'm a public school teacher, and it's very hard to go to school in this climate where we are constantly having active shooter drills. And I teach high school, but it's scary for my students, and that's something that they shouldn't live in fear coming to school. So bans on assault-style, military-style weapons, no one needs that in their own residential home. The second thing that I would implement are red flag laws, which would temporarily take away weapons from people who are deemed to be mentally unstable or violent. This would solve a lot of domestic abuse issues, a lot of school shootings, things where people get their hands on guns who shouldn't have their hands on guns. We also need to make sure that there is an increased waiting time for people to access guns so that they aren't making an impulsive decision when they're buying their weapons with an end result in mind.
As a legislator or lawmaker, what will your role be in reducing violence in our communities?
Reducing violence is a community-wide problem. And I think that we need to really take a look at how our funds are distributed across our different departments. We need to reallocate some funding so that it goes to preventative measures. We can't just combat violence after it's happened. We have to prevent it. So that looks like investing in our communities, putting money into our communities. So putting money into things like counseling, increasing the access to counselors in schools, for instance. We need more social services, such as counseling for domestic abuse, for mental health. We need to start talking about mental health like a physical ailment the same way that we do, so people have access to mental health care and recovery. The same thing goes for addiction. if we can address addiction and homelessness, those are all factors that contribute to violence in some of our lower income areas especially. And those need to be addressed, and we need to provide proper funding so that we can focus our attentions on the right areas.
Following the census, our state legislators will redraw our district lines for federal and state officials. This has led in the past to gerrymandering, districts that favor one party over others. Do you think that is fair to voters? And if not, what will you do to give voters fair districts?
Gerrymandering is inherently unfair to voters, and it is inherently undemocratic. Anyone who supports the current system of redrawing lines is only doing so for their own advantage. We need an independent commission that would draw the lines of our state to ensure that when a person goes to the ballot box, when they go to vote, their vote means something. Too often in these gerrymandered districts, you go to vote, but your vote is already discounted because of the area that you live in, because of the way that the lines were drawn in your district, to make it almost impossible for you to ever be represented. If we want true democracy, if we want true representation in Harrisburg, legislators shouldn't be able to pick who votes for them. They should be responsible to the voter, not the other way around.
Small business is important in Berks County. Will you favor additional state funds to help them survive the pandemic?
Absolutely. Small businesses are the backbone of our communities. Small businesses are our friends, our neighbors, our families who are working to support themselves, who are living out the American dream. We need to support them. We provided economic relief to small businesses, but unfortunately a lot of it came too late for many businesses. Small businesses remained closed for far too long compared to their big box store competitors. And so now, as the pandemic has persisted, as we are still moving through this pandemic, we need to continue to supplement small businesses' incomes so that when this pandemic is over, they can reopen their business to full capacity. Many businesses under the current guidelines are still limited in the capacity that they can work in. So we really need to provide them with the funds until we can fully reopen, so that when they do, they're still there for us. They're part of our communities, and we need to make sure that we protect them.
What should be done to prevent evictions and to address homelessness during the pandemic?
Well, our governor started with the moratorium on evictions, which I think was a great first step and helped a lot of people remain in their homes through the height of the pandemic. But it's not over. People still aren't back to normal yet. And now it's up to our legislative branch, our state Congress, to continue that eviction moratorium to ensure that people can stay in their homes throughout this pandemic. We also need to address homelessness. And this pandemic or no pandemic, we need to address homelessness. We need to find ways, especially for our young citizens who are homeless, we need to find sources for them, shelters for them, increased funding for food banks and shelters, providing more areas for them to get support. And that comes from the state level funding, especially during a pandemic when those are going to be our most vulnerable groups of people.
What is your plan to address the crumbling infrastructure in Pennsylvania?
Infrastructure is essential to our community building. Infrastructure is essential to fixing some of the wage problems in Pennsylvania, to fixing racial disparities in Pennsylvania. If people have access to proper functioning infrastructure, they can more easily travel from place to place to get better jobs. And so I would invest in our infrastructure. We need to fix our roads. We need to build bridges. And more than that, we need to look into public transportation as well, providing more options for people to get from point A to point B to not tax our infrastructure so heavily.
Will you support, well, I think you said this in your opening, but we'll give you more time to go over it, supporting raising the minimum wage, and what should that minimum wage be?
Absolutely. And when talking about the minimum wage, I like to think of it as a livable wage. We shouldn't be talking about what's the minimum people can have to survive. We need to talk about what's livable, what's going to help them and their families survive. We absolutely need to raise the minimum wage. We need to compete with the states around us who have all raised their minimum wage. I believe that eventually we need to get to $15 an hour, and I recognize that that's going to be a very complex matter, balancing the needs of our workers with the needs of the employers. So I would propose a gradual adjustment minimum wage over the next 5 years to get us to $15 an hour. And I think we can reach across the table and talk about this in a bipartisan manner to really make sure that all Pennsylvanians have access to a livable wage, because it is, to me, an urgent priority, and is essential to providing other things. Like, we have way too many families who, unfortunately, are on free and reduced lunch in their schools. That's taxing our school systems too. We could fix all this by raising the minimum wage and making sure that our families are protected.
Agriculture counts for about half of Berks County's economy. Our local farmers are adapting as much as possible to changes in our climate. Do you think the state should do more to address climate change to protect local agriculture? And if so, what should it do?
Absolutely. In Pennsylvania, our farmers are the backbone of our communities. Our farmers, they're already seeing the effects of climate change, and we need to protect them. We need them, and they need us. Absolutely, we need to end fracking. That should be number one on our list of things to do. We need to end fracking, and we need to move away from the use of fossil fuels altogether. We need to convert to renewable energy sources, solar and wind power, to make sure that our farmers can sustain themselves and therefore sustain us in Pennsylvania. We rely on them for our food sources, and they are already seeing the effects of climate change, and we need to do something about that at the state level.
Pennsylvania has passed bills to help root out rogue police. Would we be better off if we separated the crime-fighting functions of police from the social service functions that they now provide also?
Absolutely. Our police officers are being asked to do way too much. They're wearing way too many hats. Their job should be crime prevention. As I mentioned earlier, we need to look at other ways to reallocate our funding to prevent crime. There are so many social services that police get called for that they are not properly trained to deal with: drug addiction and overdoses, domestic disputes, suicide prevention. Those are all things that are social services that the cops really shouldn't be involved in unless necessary, unless it's needed for protection. And so I think that there is a way that we can look at the way that the state funds these social services and our police departments to reallocate, reinvest in our communities to ensure that we have the proper preventative measures in place. Lowering our number of homeless, getting access to recovery for drug addicts, getting access to counseling for domestic abuse victims, and mental health services.
Do you believe there is systemic racism in Pennsylvania? And if so, how will you help change it?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, this is a concern not just in Pennsylvania, but across the entire nation. But I think in Pennsylvania, again, there are ways that we could look at our fundamental systems, right? Systemic racism means that it's happening not even out of an explicit bias. So we need to look at things like properly funding our education systems, that some cities and more urban areas aren't receiving less funding than our other suburban areas. Education is a way for people to get out of a bad situation. We also need to look at, investing again in our communities, investing in low-income areas, giving people a chance in education so that we can move forward from this systemic racism that we're facing across the nation.
Discrimination in housing against LGBTQ people is still legal in Pennsylvania. Should we have laws to stop this discrimination?
Yes, absolutely. The LGBT community has, we've made leaps and bounds, but we're still not there yet. Housing discrimination is just one issue that the LGBT community is facing, and that needs to be addressed, and it could very easily be addressed. And there have been several proposals on the House floor that would provide equality for the LGBT community, and they've never been moved forward, and that's really unfortunate. No one should be evicted from their homes or not allowed to rent in a certain area because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. They need to be protected as a protected class the same way that women are protected or minorities are protected.
There are currently inequities in the funding of our schools. Schools in rich zip codes thrive. Schools in poor zip codes struggle. What will you do to provide every child in Pennsylvania a quality education?
Yeah, so I can't stress this enough how important education is to our communities. If we want a truly equal society, everyone needs to have access to quality education. So, unfortunately, a lot of the reason that we have this inequality in our schools is because we rely so heavily on property taxes. Um, Property taxes need to be cut to provide relief for our constituents, but also because it's really an unfair way of funding our schools. We need to look to new revenue sources to create equitable education across Pennsylvania. There are new revenue streams out there that would make sure that every school gets similar funding, and maybe even some schools who do rely heavily on property taxes get more funding from the schools and not less because of low test scores or what have you. Looking into other revenue streams, such as increasing the sales tax in areas where it isn't already raised, possibly looking into the legalization of marijuana as a revenue stream, are all ways that we could generate new money to put into our schools without burdening our citizens and taxpayers.
People never like taxes, yet they are necessary. In this time of increasing disparity between the incomes of the well-to-do and the poor, actually between the well-to-do and everyone else, is a flat income tax, as we have it in Pennsylvania, still appropriate? And please tell us why you think as you do.
No, a flat income tax or a flat tax is not appropriate. We need to be looking at, again, this all comes back to creating equality, creating equity in our societies. And we need to be looking at how to level the playing field, how to make more equitable communities, more equitable schools, and providing families with the resources that they need. So in some areas, we need to be raising taxes where they can afford to pay a little bit more, that they might not notice that little extra bump in the taxes. Whereas in other areas, a 1% increase really goes a long way, and they can't afford that little bit of extra taxes that they're paying. Again, no one likes to raise taxes, but we need a tax program that works for everyone, not just the people who make the most money.
The next budget is going to be very tight because of the impact of COVID-19. Where would you cut, and what services do you feel are essential?
COVID-19 has put a strain on our whole state, our whole national economy. We need to be thinking about where we can generate money. Things that we need to cut are the loopholes that businesses get out of paying taxes for. If we made businesses pay their fair share of taxes, we would have a whole new revenue stream for our state, and that budget might not be so difficult to balance. We also need to look into new revenue streams. As I mentioned earlier, new ways to generate tax money to go into our communities. And as far as what I think is essential, when you think about this during this whole pandemic, what has been repeated over and over again is that our healthcare workers, our education professionals, they are essential. And those are really services, our food service providers. Those are services that are essential and need to be given government assistance to make sure that they survive this pandemic, but also that they can thrive even when the pandemic is over.
Do you believe, I think you addressed this, but we'll go into it a little more deeply, that the fracking industry has caused environmental damage? And if so, what dollar amount of fees or fines should be charged, and how should the monies be dispersed?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that we need to end fracking in Pennsylvania and in the nation. But specifically, as my job as a state legislator, it'd be to end it here in Pennsylvania. I don't think you can put any dollar amount on children's lives, families' lives. When you're talking with families whose children have cancer, have Ewing sarcoma because of the water that is polluted in their area, you can't put a dollar amount on that. You can't look at a mother's eye and tell her, here, this will make up for it. So if we can't end fracking immediately, which I understand that we can't, we do need to make sure that those impact fees that businesses are being charged are going into those communities that are hardest hit by these environmental damages. So it can't be money that the municipality gets to use at their whim. It needs to be money that's going to the families, that's going to them to help them pay their medical bills, to help them get access to clean water. So the fees that are going back into the community need to be a direct correlation to the environmental damage that they've incurred.
Should Pennsylvania decrease the use of fossil fuels and carbon emissions, and if so, how? And what is a reasonable time frame to do this?
Yeah, so I'll start again by saying that, to talk about a time frame, it needs to happen now. It needs to start happening now with the hope of us moving totally to renewable energy very soon. I wouldn't want to put a time limit on that because I want to see it happen as quickly as possible. So we need to convert to clean energy. We should be looking to solar power and wind power to replace the fossil fuels that we're digging out of our ground and that are causing, wreaking havoc on our climate. We need to be moving towards that stuff now. And I think further than that, we need to be thinking about how this is going to impact jobs across Pennsylvania. So if we get a head start on this, we can offer training services for people who are currently in those fossil fuel industries to ensure that when the time comes to get off of fossil fuels, there are jobs waiting for them that they are trained and ready for. I think this will open up a whole new sector of jobs for people while not losing the jobs that people have had. The environment is critical, and we need to really start thinking about the future and not living in the past anymore.
We do have time left, so we're going to offer you 60 seconds for a closing statement.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. Again, I'm Kelly McDonough, and I'm running in the 129th because I want to represent you. I've seen the demographics change in this community, and I love this community. I've served this community as a teacher, as an advisor. I'm part of this community, and I want to continue to serve it in Harrisburg. If elected, I promise, above all else, that I will be accessible to you. I will be visible to you. I love attending community events and seeing and talking to people in my neighborhood and in my community. And further than that, I will make sure that, every email that is sent, every phone call that I get, I will do my best to respond to personally. I will hold town halls. Being a representative means being your voice. I can't be your voice if I don't know what you need. And so being a representative, if elected, I promise to make myself accessible, to make myself visible to you so that I can best represent you when I'm in Harrisburg. And I can bring those positive changes back to our neighborhoods here in Berks County and the 129th District.
Thank you, Mrs. McDonald. I'll remind our voters that if you have any questions about voting, whether you're registered, you want a mail-in ballot, you need to know your polling place, you can get that information at votespa.com. And I thank our viewers for watching Candidates Up Front.
We make about 45 million pounds of chips in a quarter. That equates to about 200 million pounds of potatoes, which is quite a few. What's interesting with M&T is they're a small town bank, and as we've grown, they've also grown with us. They've got the resources that you would need in order to go big, but they also have that friendly local community feel so that it makes it seem easier than it probably is.